All right, hello everyone. Today I'm here with Marshall Sutcliffe. I thought that like you're gonna say no for sure, but you said yes. So thank you for that. I really appreciate it.
No, I don't mind at all.
Most of the watchers probably know who Marshall is, but just for a little bit of an introduction, he's one of the most famous, if not the most famous, Magic commentators, and he also has his podcast Limited Resources. And he's a guy who just loves these blue wacky creatures like Muldrifters and Manowars to drive it limited. Is that how you would describe yourself as well?
Yeah, that describes my career perfectly. I do a podcast, I do commentary, and I love Manowar. In fact, if you look behind me, I've got the original
yeah, I didn't even
artwork.
notice that.
Yeah, that's the original artwork for the Portal version of Manowar, which is actually my favorite artwork of it. I like the other one a lot too, but that one, the artwork sold. Some guy in Australia has it. But I was able to, with some help from a guy named Josh, track this one down from the original artist actually a few years ago.
Mm-hmm. So you know, anyone who's like watching coverage of like maybe the arena tournaments and stuff probably know who you are, but you know, it probably took a long time to get there. Can you just like talk about the beginnings? I think it was you just started the podcast and it kind of went from there, but I don't actually know for sure. So if you can talk about it, that would be great.
Yeah, that was exactly it. I started the podcast, and when we started, it was me and Ryan Spain, who has his own stream now. He actually worked at Wizards for a number of years too. And we were kind of starting from scratch. Basically, we were playing poker a lot. I was playing semi-professionally, and he was playing quite a bit because part of the job he had at the time involved designing a game that had a poker element. So we were playing a lot. And I had played Magic when I was younger, but I never took it seriously at all. I just kind of messed around. And he was like, hey, you know, you should play some Magic. And I was like, nah, dude, I'm over it. Like, I play poker now. I'm you know, that was a long time ago. And he's like, yeah, okay. And then, like, you know, kept bugging me about it. And eventually I played, and then I would send him messages like, hey, so, like, if a creature has first strike, and he's like, I got him. And he did. He got me. And, you know, I found the best game in the world, Magic. And so I fell in there. And then as we started doing the podcast, I started to play GPs, right? I was interested in competitive play. That was what I wanted to pursue. But I was new, basically, to Magic. So I was building up my skill set slowly. And I started finally feeling like playing in some GPs was the thing I should do. So I started playing in a couple of local ones, and then I started even traveling for them. And what ended up happening was I went to GP Austin, I think it was, in Texas, and I had made buddies with Brian David Marshall. And I had talked to him online. I think I met him once, or I definitely met him once. We were, you know, not close friends, but, you know, I knew him. I would say hi to him. I thought he was awesome. I mean, I watched the PT coverage and stuff, so I just thought it was cool that I was talking to Brian David Marshall, to be honest with you. But
I'm feeling the same way now talking to you, by the way.
That's cool. And so I was like, I went to that tournament. I made day 2. It was limited. It was in Innistrad. And I went 2-1, 2-1 in the drafts, so I missed top 8. But I went up and I told him, hey, you know, oh man, I missed top 8, but it was sweet, and you know, that was my best finish at the time. And he was like, hey, he's like, do you want to hop in the booth and do a few rounds of coverage for like the quarterfinals? And I'm like, are you serious? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds sweet, right? Like, I mean, what do I have to lose, right? So what they had me do was sit behind Raphael Levy, who was like the biggest name in the draft pod. And I wrote down notes about his picks. I got to watch him draft. And I remember, Petr, this is one of my favorite memories from when this was all happening is, so BDM walks me over to the draft area. And you know how it is at the draft area at a GP or a PT. It's like you can't go in there, right? Like everybody. Yeah. And so I start walking through, and I'm with BDM. And one of the judges walks up and goes, hey, you can't be here, right? Because he you know, I have a backpack on. I mean, I'm clearly just a Magic player. And BDM goes, he's coverage. And I was like, oh man, like that feels cool. But again, I had no idea what any of this stuff meant. So anyway, I watched Raph draft, I took notes, I went in the booth, and I did the quarters and the semis with BDM and Rich Hagan, which those are the two that I had been watching. I watched the old clips of BDM and Randy, but for me watching, from home, it was BDM and Hagan. So I was just like, this is unreal, right? And it went well. It was cool, but I had no idea really what was going on with it. But it turns out that the boss of coverage, his name's Greg Collins, and he's a mentor of mine. He's been my boss for a long time on coverage, and he's somebody who's really helped my career a lot. But at the time, I had just met him that day, and he came up and he was like, "So, we're going to be expanding GP coverage to cover a lot more events. Would you be interested in covering these?" And I was like, I had a full-time job at the time. I was playing poker as well. I was doing the Magic, but I was like, yeah, like we'll talk when we get back home to Seattle and we'll figure it out. And we did. I did a GP here. It went well. And I got a call that said, hey, do you want to come be on the Pro Tour coverage for the first one that we're doing all the rounds in Barcelona? And, a few months later, I found myself in Barcelona, like jet-lagged out of my mind and trying to figure out what coverage was.
One thing that I want to ask about is that when I actually watched your first coverage that you did, I was just like thinking, who is this guy? But then I was actually quite impressed with like how much you understand Magic. You like know all the fundamentals. Maybe sometimes there is like a guy in coverage who maybe doesn't necessarily understand it on a deep of a level, but he just like knows how to talk very well. But you kind of had both, and I was just like, where did this guy came from? Like, how did you? Is it maybe because you just hanged out around pros or just like watched a lot of videos, or I just think that you're like a really good player. How did you acquire those skills?
Yeah, what I really did was I took the skills that I learned from poker and I transferred them over to Magic. And it gives you such a huge head start when you don't have to get your brain over the hump of like understanding variance and that it happens and understanding what an out is, right? Like when you first start playing Magic and somebody says, well, what out were you playing to? What were you trying to set up there? And they go, what do you mean? Like, I get one card off my library, but I don't know what it's going to be. And you're like, okay, sit down, right? We have to really like, you have to really go. I didn't have to do that. Like, I understood how those concepts work. So then I could start applying them to Magic the game. Also, I just played a lot. I mean, I love playing. I still do. I play all the time. And I mean, honestly, that's part of it, just to keep up on this stuff. But I'll tell you what, at that time, I didn't know any pro players. When I first started doing coverage, I only knew a couple. And then over time, I made friends. Luis and I started doing the podcast together. I made friends with him a few years before that. And I started being able to pick the brains of some of the really good players and stuff. And boy, two things that happened from that. Number one, it was a huge level up for me because I started to see the game in a different way than I had before even. And that helps me in the booth a lot because if I know the mindset of how a pro player is approaching it, generally speaking, I can put myself in their head. And even if I can't sit down and do it as well as they can or as consistently as they can, I understand how it works. So that helps. And the other thing is, man, I had a huge level of respect even more for the professional players versus, for example, the good players from my area, right? The people that I would lose to in the top 8 of a PTQ or whatever that everybody thought was the really good player. And it turns out there's a lot more to go when, going from being the best player in your area to being one of the better players in the world. They view the world in a completely different way. They view the game in a completely different way. And I remember really trying to absorb as much of that stuff as I could at that time as well.
Yeah, even for myself, I played on a Pro Tour for like 6 years, but there are still people who, they're just like on a completely different level. Like the game is just like so deep that I definitely agree with what you're saying.
Yeah, and you don't know that, right? You have to play against them or talk to them before it really sinks in.
When you're just watching them play on maybe like the coverage, you don't really see all the small decisions and stuff, but then you like talk to them and they like explain the thought process behind their decisions and stuff, like, and the way they sideboarded and stuff, and like, there is a lot more than I thought to it.
Yeah, I had to learn that lesson myself in the booth because there were times where I would question what a player was doing. I would say, well, that doesn't make any sense. They must have made a mistake. And then I would find out later that they were on like 3 levels deeper than I was thinking. And I was like, I better be really, really careful about what I call a mistake in the booth, because at this point, especially if I happen to know who the player is and know that they're like a truly excellent player, I will default to them unless it's like the only possible thing could be that it was a mistake, because again, you can understand a matchup pretty well, but when Brad Nelson takes a certain line of play, he has 5 things that he's juggling that he's, trying to account for. And I don't go, well, that was a dumb mistake, Brad. You shouldn't have done that. I just think, let's see how this plays out, because he's got a reason for it,
Yeah, a lot of the times when that happens is that you just see both players' hand and, he just does something and he gets super punished. But obviously he didn't know that that was the card that his opponent was holding. And, if he'd done the other thing, it would maybe lose to something different, stuff like that.
Right.
So, yeah. We talked about it briefly a little bit, the podcast that you do, Limited Resources. You're doing it with LSV, Luis Scott Vargas, right now, but it wasn't always the case at the beginning, right? I just wanted to ask about the beginnings. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you started doing that even before you started doing coverage, right?
Yeah, I started the podcast with Ryan in 2009. And him and I started it just because we wanted to. Basically what happened was he was the one, again, that introduced me back to the game. So I was having conversations with him while we were playing poker or online kind of all the time about like these concepts and these things that I was trying to understand about Magic and how to play it. And he's an excellent player and a very even better teacher. He's a game designer, for his job. He was a game designer in R&D at Wizards of the Coast. Like, he's got the chops to truly fundamentally understand Magic and how it works. And at some point, he wanted to work at WotC, and so, we kind of got the idea that one of the things that could help him is if we got his voice and his writing and hit him out there into the world, because we had heard that Tom Lapilli, who'd gotten hired, that when he went for his interview, that Tom Lapilli was one of the first people to really write about Cube and designing a cube. And so when he got interviewed, the person in R&D was like, well, I read your Cube articles, and they talked about that. So like what he had done outside in the content world influenced, what they thought of him and maybe got him the interview or whatever. So I wanted Ryan to get his opinions and voice out there. So he started writing these really great articles. But then I was a big podcast listener back then. I was really early on listening to podcasts. In like 2007 or something, I was listening to some of the first podcasts that came out. And one of the jobs I had, I was driving a lot. I had to drive all day in like a truck. And so I would listen to podcasts all day long. And so I was like, we could do one. Like I told Ryan, like, we can do one. Like, I have a computer. Like, I think I could figure out how to do it. And that way, the conversations that him and I were having, we could share with everybody, because I was like, well, other people can learn this too. This isn't just for me. And then, of course, it would also maybe serve to get his voice out in the community a bit more, to get him, a little bit more known. So we started the show there with me and Ryan, and then after a couple of years, he actually did get hired at Wizards of the Coast. So it worked, I guess. I mean, it was obviously a factor, multiple factors, but that was probably one of them. And then I was going to stop the show, actually. I was like, well, I guess I'm done, because the show was me and Ryan. That was what we did. That was the show. But the listeners of the show at that time, the listenership had actually grown a decent amount. And they were like, no, like, you have to keep doing the show. And I'm like, well, I don't know if I probably won't find anybody I really want to do this show with. But I actually got really lucky. My friend Zame introduced me to a guy named John Laux, who is a local player, a guy that I had played against a couple of times but didn't really know. And we got along super well. He's an excellent player. And he took the reign up, and him and I did the show for a couple of years. Then he got hired at Wizards of the Coast too. and then another, really the best player that I've worked with outside of Luis is Brian Wong, who was a friend of John's and somebody that I knew, again, another Seattle player, a truly excellent player, and turns out a great podcaster too. And so we kind of bullied him into coming on, and he did the show for a couple of years, and then I went to Luis after Brian left.
The show is called Limited Resources, so it's obviously only about limited. Did you maybe, and I assume you're a big limited fan and you probably played more than constructed, did you maybe had problems with covering constructed, and maybe you had to start playing it a lot more because of that? Was that an issue for you?
Yeah, it was. Like I'm really like if you put me in front of like MTGO or Arena, my hand just goes to the draft button. Like it just clicks. I don't even think about it, and I'm just in a draft. I streamed earlier this week, and I fired up the stream, and I opened up Arena, and then I just saw Cube Draft, like the little button, and I just hit it, and my chat was like, "What are we playing? Like, is it best of one or best of three?" And I'm like, "I have no idea. I just saw Cube Draft, and my hand clicked it. Like it's involuntary at this point." So, for me, I had to kind of develop an appreciation for constructed. I mean, I played it at PTQs and stuff, so it wasn't like my first time, but like if given the choice, I would just draft every time. Now I have kind of a system that I use to get myself familiarized with the format about as quickly as I can, because I'm pretty good at reading deck lists and figuring out what a deck does. Like I've really honed that skill, but there is absolutely no substitute for playing games. This is and it happens really quickly, right? Where you can really get some fundamentals down, because the truth is I can't be a true expert in every deck of every format, right? There's just too many. So I pick the ones I want. Like, for example, I've covered, probably 4 or 5 Legacy tournaments in my life. I will not go deep on Legacy because I don't cover it enough, and I don't play it outside of I don't play it ever, right? I don't have the cards. It's not a thing for me. So I write that off and say, if I'm in the booth with Legacy, I hope I'm going to have a really good expert, and I'm going to keep things pretty simple, right? Because it happens so rarely. But like historic, modern, of course, standard, pioneer to a point, I need to know these things, right? Like I'm not going to bring surface level stuff to the type of tournaments that we cover. So what I usually do is I'll pick one deck that just looks good to me, like that suits my play style or something that I think I might enjoy, and I'll play a ton of matches with it. And I'll pay close attention to how it plays, but also what other people are doing with the other popular decks. Once I feel like I have a pretty good hold on that deck, then I'll start rotating through the other decks basically until the tournament comes up. And that gives me a good feel for the lay of the land. I still rely on pro players that I trust about, like, I won't get a sense necessarily for, like, this is a 60-40 matchup, Yeah. I played 4 matches. Like, how am I supposed to know that, So I'll ask them, hey, you guys tested this deck for the last week and a half. What do you think? And then I'll kind of combine those two together when I'm in the booth.
You're one of the most famous Magic commentators that there are, and there are actually like not that many commentators in Magic, so it probably requires very specific skills. What are like some of the fundamentals that make for like a great commentator? Maybe like something that you learned over the time that you weren't doing at the beginning. Just like talk about your work a little bit if you can.
Yeah, So the first thing that you need is you really do need a little bit of talent for it. And what I mean by that is like for example, the first time that I went in the booth that I told you about at that GP, I wasn't nervous at all. And I was in front of the camera. That was like the first time I'd ever been on camera for anything, and I didn't even think about it. I didn't even care. Like some people are like, oh crap, there's a camera, and they're fidgeting, and they can't, and they're really hyper self-aware of like how they're speaking, and did that sound weird, and what are people thinking, or they'll say in their mind, they'll picture speaking to thousands and thousands of people at once, and that's very intimidating. And for whatever reason, that part of my brain doesn't work. So I've never had that issue. So that's really nice, right? Just lucky. And then the other part is you have to be communicative naturally, right? Like if like we're doing an interview here, right? When you ask me a question, like I could do a half an hour on each answer off the top of my head, right? Like I could sit here and talk to you for 7 hours straight, right? It's just always going, right? At a moment's notice on a coverage stream, if my producer gets in my ear and says, hey, we need you to stretch for like 5 minutes, like we need 5 minutes of content, right? Like right now, live on the air, you didn't know it was coming, and you're in the middle of a sentence, and somebody goes, we need you to stretch for 5 minutes, I can do that. Like, I can just off the top of my head go, God, Luis, one thing I wanted to bring up was 2 rounds ago, we saw this sideboard card come in, and I did not, and boom, off we go, right? And we're talking about something. And I can do that part. So those I'm lucky for. The other parts, though, are very much things that you can learn. And the way that I like to describe it and the way that I've done it myself and the thing that I had to kind of understand was when you're in the booth, for most of us, there are some people that are exceptions, but for most of us, it is us, right? It is me. Like, I don't talk or act that much differently, right? I'm not putting on a show or, a character or something. Yep. But what you have to do is you have to turn down the parts of you that don't really jive in the booth and learn how and when to turn up the parts of you that are good for the booth, right? And so, like, here's a couple of examples.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. So one example of something that I would need to turn down, or a couple examples. One, obviously, swearing, right? You shouldn't swear in the booth. It's not the right time.
Did that ever happen to you, that you swear on camera?
I haven't, no. I don't know if you have this, but, like, that thing in the back of your head when you're, like, around your grandma? And you just don't swear anymore, but when you're with your friends, you might just be like effing this, and you're just swearing it up.
Well, I'm from Czech Republic, so my grandma actually swears all the time. So I'm like...
Okay, fair enough. All right. Well, my grandma didn't, and so I would just like whoop, and that same thing happens. But when I'm in the booth, I swear all the time. In fact, I really like it. So I had to like turn that part all the way down. But another part that's a little more subtle is, like, Petr, let's say you and I were hanging out after a GP, right? We're chilling in the hotel lobby and somebody's got their laptop open and somebody's drafting or somebody's watching part of the stream and we're watching somebody play. You and I would probably fall into a conversation where we were more or less critiquing what the player was doing. Right? Like, oh, that was a stupid attack. Now he's going to lose to this. Or, wow, he took that. I wouldn't have taken that card. This other card's way better. Like, this person must have no idea what they're doing. Or, these kind of like this pattern where, and this is a good thing, I think, by the way, where you're challenging ideas from people, right? When you're in a testing team, you don't want everybody just agreeing with each other, right? You need to have some people kind of disagree and challenge. Well, that doesn't really fly in the booth, particularly if, like, you and I were in the booth together, right? If I say, wow, this attack could be really good here for this guy, he might be able to win next turn. And you're like, no, dude, he shouldn't have attacked here because, right, it's just like the whole conversation just dies. And so, I've needed to learn to recognize that that's not the setting that we're in. Mm-hmm. We're not lying. Like, I'm not going to lie, right? Like, I kind of refuse to do that in the booth. But I also don't want to focus on the critical parts. On the same other side of the coin, if you and I were sitting and watching a match and somebody made, like, a huge top deck, right? And we're just in the hotel lobby, like, watching on a laptop. One of us might be like, yeah, well, that happens, I guess, or, sure asked for it, or, must be nice, or, we'd make some little snide comment about it, right? But in the booth, if you do that, it's like, that's not exciting, and something really exciting just happened, and you have to tell the people. Now, I have a natural enthusiasm for the game, but I don't turn it up to 10 all the time, right? If I'm watching at home, I'm not like, oh my God, I can't, I'm just kind of like, oh yeah, that sucks. Like, damn, that was insane, right? Like, whoa. But in the booth, I need to be able to, at the right moment, turn that up all the way to 10, right? And just be like, ah, and me and Paul are really good at feeding off of each other with that. But here's the trick. That's real. Right? It isn't how I would normally react if I was sitting at home, but that's a turned up version of what I'm actually feeling inside. And that's the key.
You're involved with Magic, like, all the time. You hang out with pros, you talk to Luis all the time and stuff like that. Do you ever, like, feel like maybe that you would like to be there and, like, prove that you're also really good yourself? Maybe when you see these announcements, well, you're actually doing the announcements yourself, but if you were, like, one of those players, are you, like, sometimes thinking, oh, maybe I should, like, quit doing this for, like, 2 years and, like, try to prove something to myself or, like, to other people as well, or is that not the case?
Yeah, it's interesting. Yes, I definitely feel that. I'm very, very competitive, right? That's why I got into Magic. That's why I like poker. That's why I play basketball. Like, it's an outlet for me to kind of put it on the line, right? And the truth is that it's just, from a practical perspective, a bad decision, right? Like,
I understand that. I'm just asking about the feeling.
Oh, a feeling, yes. I definitely have that feeling. And I'll tell you, Petr, it's really interesting that you bring that up because, like for example, and I've had to face this down a couple of times. One time I made top 8 at a PTQ. I was in the quarterfinals. I was actually playing Jackson Cunningham, who made the finals of a PT against Ivan.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was playing against him, and like I had just been battling and going, and I made top 8. I was like, this is great, and we did a draft, and then I sat down against Jackson, and I was like, crap, do I actually want to win this thing? Like, because it's really awkward if I win. Like, if I make it to the PT, I would play in it, but I would give up my pay for that thing, and also somebody else is going to be in my seat for that round, or for that tournament, and I don't love that idea. I take a lot of pride in bringing the game that I think is great to people and opening the doors for them to come in, and I don't want anybody else to do it as long as I can do it. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like that's something I've really built up. But at the same time, I really would like to do that. And the reason I said it was interesting that you brought it up is because, I finished 150th at Limited Mythic this season, or last season. So this Saturday, there's a qualifier for a whatever, and like, I have to decide, am I going to get up and play this thing? And ultimately these tournaments can lead you to playing in tournaments that you would normally be covering, and you have to decide. My decision would be yes, I would play. I know that I don't want to be a full-time pro player. I really love doing coverage. It's more consistent. I've put a lot of time and effort into getting as good as I can at it. I don't, if I had to guess where I would land as a professional player, like if I dedicated myself to it, I would probably be like on the old system somewhere like silver to gold, right? Like if I was like consistent gold, I would be like sweet, and then once every few years I might get platinum or something, and then once every few years I'd fall off, like that's probably like I believe where I would end up. And that doesn't, if I really thought I could like be Paulo, then maybe it'd be worth it, but I know that I can't. So that's less so. But God, yeah, man, that feeling inside of me is very much there. And if I did qualify for one of those events, I would play in it. And the reason for that is I want the experience, right? Experiencing that from how a player sees it helps me out in the booth so much with all the little things that you don't get to see unless you're actually doing it. The feelings that you have, the pressure that you feel, all of that kind of stuff. And also, it's just good for my credibility, right? I had a little unlucky or lucky, depending on how you view it, but I was just starting to get good at GP. So I was doing like my 4th or 5th GP. I finished 11-4, 2 GPs in a row. I was like starting to get to that point where I could go, okay, if I can run a little hot here, I might be able to hit a top 8 or something. And then boom, I jumped off it and started doing coverage. And then I didn't play GPs because I was covering all of them. So I never really got to show that I could be good at this, even though I'm confident that I could. So yeah, I do feel that way.
You're obviously probably pretty busy with like making all these like commentary. You have your podcast. You sometimes make like limited videos and stuff. Are there like any other projects that you're like thinking about and maybe you haven't started doing them yet? Like, is there like something in the future that's coming up? I mean, if you don't want to answer that, that's fine. But I just want.
I want to answer that. Yeah, okay. I actually have a project that I really started about 6 or 7 months ago. That's been really great for me. I was looking to do something, like I'm a creative person. I like making stuff, right? And I like putting it out into the world. And I also feel like my skill set is suited towards things that are very deep, right? Like Magic's a very deep game, right? It's that you can't be really good at it if you just play every once in a while. It's the kind of thing that you could play your whole life and never really feel like you got there. And I like stuff like that. That's what I'm attracted to. That's why I don't like board games and stuff like that, where it's just like once you kind of figure it out, you're like, okay, I got it. And it's like I don't want to. To me, it just becomes like putting together a puzzle, and I don't really care about that. I like stuff like this that you can keep trying and trying and trying. That's why I like basketball too, right? Like you keep trying to get better and better and better, and you never really do. Well, one of my other hobbies is watches. You know, like I collect vintage watches.
I had no idea about that.
Yeah, I love watches. I've got a collection, and I'm really into them. Well, as a extension of that, I started working on them. So like, look, I've got the little thing for your.
But you're like making your own watches, or?
So I'm not to that level, but I'm restoring old ones. So I buy them off of eBay. Like, you know, here's one I got right now, and this is what they look like, by the way, when they're still being worked on. Like, I got this little thing, and this has all the parts in it of one that I took apart. Well, what I did is I combined that with what I've learned about making content. Right, so I have a YouTube channel now that is about taking apart and fixing old watches, and I started it. I technically started about a year ago, but I didn't actually start working on it until the pandemic, and it took off. It's doing really well. Like
really?
It's like my own side thing now.
Are you promoting it on Twitter? Because I didn't like see it, so I just okay. So I was just surprised that.
I'm really bad at promoting stuff. I just hate doing it. And then also, like, my Twitter's, you know, very much for, like, my Magic stuff, and I figure that the crossovers, I'll probably put up a tweet. That's a good reminder to do so. But, like, I have a separate Instagram for it. It's all separated out. And it's kind of my escape, you know, like, I like to work on stuff. I don't like to just, like, you know, I like to like do stuff. So this has been great because, I mean, it's funny. Like, here's a camera that I was using last night to work on a watch.
How many views a video are you getting? You said you're doing it for 6 months, so that's like not that long of a time. How well is it doing?
The one that has the highest has like over 700,000 views now.
Oh, holy.
And then, which is great. And then the ones that are kind of in the next tier, of which there's probably like 5 or 6, you know, I don't get to make these videos too often. I've probably got like 10 or 15 up, have like over 100,000 up to 200,000. And then I would say average after that is like 50 to 60,000 or so, with a few that are kind of a different type that are lower. But pretty good. I mean, I'm way faster than I thought. I mean, to be honest, when I put them up, I didn't think anybody would watch. You know, it's just like, I don't know. I find this stuff fascinating and interesting, but like that doesn't mean other people do. But I was doing it.
You had to post it somewhere, right? Like, otherwise no one would find out about it. Like, or did you just post it on YouTube and people started watching it without like promoting it?
Yeah, because I don't have a following, and like there's a whole watch YouTube, Instagram community space thing similar to Magic, but I was zero. I had nothing. You know, like nobody had ever heard of any of this stuff. So I just started posting the videos on YouTube. I don't know, just because I wanted to. And for like a few months, they had like a few views, you know, just nothing. But then it started to pick up, and then I put up one video of an old watch that I did, and it kind of hit, you know, like it started to get like significant amount of views.
Viral.
Not quite, but like it got a lot of, you know, it got 50, 60,000 views, where the rest of mine had a couple of thousand. And then I put up the next one, and it was actually a Rolex that I restored, and people love watching videos about Rolex. And that's the one that has 700 and whatever thousand. And, you know, and ever since then, you know, it's just been growing. I have a Patreon for it. I've got 23,000 subscribers on the channel now. So I'm really trying to grow it. I'm trying to make it its own separate thing, you know, which is, so that's been my big focus as of late. And I've really found a lot of satisfaction, mainly just because I really did need to do something that wasn't Magic related, just because I do so much Magic stuff. I don't want to burn out on it, you know?
That's amazing. I had no idea about that.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked.
I think we talked for more than enough. I don't want to make the video too long because, you know, if it's like over an hour or something, people are just not gonna even click on it. So, but if there's like anything else you would like to talk about, I mean, of course you can.
Well, I just wanted to say good luck on your new venture, Petr. I think it's really cool that instead of just sit around during the pandemic, you decided to try something new. And it looks like, man, it's funny because like everybody likes you, like you're a nice guy. And you know, people saying yes to you, you shouldn't be surprised that they are. And I just noticed how you've been a machine, man. You're just pumping.
Well, the reason why that is happening, it was because I actually thought that not that many people are gonna say yes, so I just messaged a lot of them.
Oh, gotcha.
And when they tell you yes, I mean, you cannot really say, oh, I actually don't have time, can we do it in a month or something? So
Now you're stuck.
so I just have to record it, and like I don't want to post it like 2 weeks after I recorded it, because a lot of the stuff that we talk about is, you know, to that day or whatever. So I'm just posting a lot of it. A lot of people message me that I shouldn't be posting as many of them because no one has time to watch all of them, but I still think that overall the attention is still bigger than if I was posting less, so I think it's fine. I don't know.
Yeah, you do what you do, man, and good luck with it. If you need any help or advice, I'm always around, to help out.
Thank you very much for that. If you guys like the video, please click on the like or subscribe button, and see you next time. Bye bye. Thanks, Marshall.
See ya.